She didn't know his name that night, didn't know his rank, didn't know that the decision she made in the rain would change everything. This is the story of Diane, a single mother, a woman the world had taught to be invisible, and a moment of kindness that would reveal something most of us forget, that sometimes the people we save are the ones who've been searching for us all along. But to understand what happened when those two soldiers appeared at her door, we have to go back. Back to a neighborhood where survival wasn't a choice, it was a daily negotiation. Back to a woman who carried dignity like armor, even when the world offered her none in return. Diane was 34. She lived in the kind of apartment complex where the landlord's promises came late and the heat came never. One bedroom, walls thin enough to hear arguments through them. A couch that doubled as her bed so her 6-year-old son, Marcus, could have his own room, his own corner of safety in a world that didn't always feel safe. She worked 2 jobs, mornings at Riverside Nursing Home, where she bathed elderly residents and listened to their stories, their loneliness. Nights cleaning downtown office buildings, vacuuming carpets that cost more per square foot than her monthly rent, emptying trash cans for people who'd never look her in the eye. Marcus asked her once why they couldn't afford the toys his classmates had. She told him they had something better, something those other kids might never understand. They had each other. But poverty has a way of making you invisible, not just to others, to yourself. Diane knew this. She felt it every time she counted coins at the grocery store, every time she chose between electricity and groceries, every time she smiled at a stranger who looked right through her. Still, she kept her apartment spotless, made sure Marcus had breakfast even when she skipped lunch, walked him to school every morning, rain or shine, because those 8 blocks were the only time she got to hold his hand before the world demanded she let go. She survived. But survival isn't the same as living. And on that November evening, when the rain came down in sheets and the temperature dropped and the buses ran late, Diane was just trying to make it home. It was nearly midnight when she saw him. The bus had dropped her 6 blocks from her building. The rain was relentless, the kind that doesn't just fall but attacks, soaking through fabric, through skin, down to the bone, her sneakers squelched with every step. Her coat, already thin, offered little protection. That's when her eyes caught movement, or rather stillness. A figure slumped against the brick wall of Turner's barbershop, closed for hours. A duffel bag beside him, a uniform dark with water, dog tags glinting under the lone working streetlight. A soldier. Diane almost kept walking. She had every reason to. It was late, she was exhausted, she had her own survival to worry about, and she'd learned long ago that stopping for everyone meant drowning in everyone else's pain. But something pulled at her. Maybe it was the way his shoulders shook, not from cold, but from something deeper. Maybe it was the dog tags that reminded her of her younger brother, Jerome, who'd enlisted at 18 to escape these same streets and never came back. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just who Diane was. She approached slowly, carefully. Her voice barely rose above the rain. The soldier looked up. His eyes were red, not from tears, but from exhaustion that lived in his bones. He was young, mid-20s, black. His name tag read Collins. She asked if he was okay. He said he was fine, just waiting for the rain to stop. His voice cracked on the word fine. Diane looked at the sky, then back at him. She made a choice. The apartment Diane brought him to wasn't much. 800 square feet of survival. A kitchen with a refrigerator that hummed too loud and cabinets that never stayed full. A bathroom where the shower ran cold more often than hot. But it was clean. It was hers. And tonight, it was shelter. Private Collins hesitated at the threshold, stammering apologies about imposing. Diane didn't let him finish. She pulled towels from the closet, the good ones she usually saved, and handed them to him without ceremony. Marcus was already asleep. Diane gave Collins her son's bed over his protests, explaining that the boy could sleep with her. She moved to the kitchen and began pulling out what little she had. Leftover rice, some chicken, a piece of cornbread she'd been saving for Marcus's school lunch tomorrow. She placed the plate in front of him, asked when he'd last eaten. He didn't answer, just stared at the food like it might disappear if he blinked. Then he began eating, slowly. Each bite deliberate, grateful, heavy with something that looked like relief and felt like shame. Diane sat across from him at the small table. The rain drummed its rhythm against the window. The refrigerator hummed. And between them, in that tiny kitchen, something unspoken passed. A recognition of shared humanity in a world that had tried to strip them both of it. He thanked her, told her she didn't have to do this. She told him she did. What Diane didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was the weight this man carried. Private Collins had been discharged from the hospital that morning following a training accident. His phone was dead. His bus ticket, missed. His family was 3 states away, unreachable. He'd walked for hours, and he'd been turned away twice before finding that wall. A church had told him they were full. A shelter had said the same. Whether they were full or whether they simply didn't want to open their doors to a young black man soaked to the bone and wearing a uniform, that's a question with an answer we already know. But Diane didn't ask these questions. She didn't ask where he'd been or why he needed help or whether he deserved it. She saw someone who needed shelter, and she gave it. Before dawn, Collins was gone. He left before Marcus woke, before the sun rose, before Diane could tell him it was okay to stay for breakfast. On the kitchen table, next to the plate he'd washed and dried, he left a note, simple, folded carefully. "Thank you. I won't forget this. J. Collins." Diane found it when she woke, read it twice, then tucked it into the drawer where she kept Marcus's crayon drawings and the letters her mother had written before she passed, things worth keeping, things that mattered. Life resumed its rhythm. Work, bills, homework, the daily mathematics of stretching too little across too much. But something from that night stayed with her. The way Collins had looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with relief. Like she'd thrown him a rope when he was drowning. It reminded her why she kept going. Why she kept showing up, kept smiling, kept choosing kindness, even when the world made it so difficult. Because here's what Diane understood that most people don't. Being black and poor in America means you're seen but not really seen. You're a statistic on a news report, a stereotype in someone's imagination, a problem to be solved or avoided. But that night, in her tiny apartment with a stranger at her table, Diane wasn't invisible. She was fully, completely human, and so was he. She thought that was the end of it, a good deed done, a stranger helped, a moment of humanity in an often inhumane world. She was wrong. If you're finding something meaningful in this story, I want you to stay with me. There's more here than just a moment of kindness. There's a truth about what happens when we choose to see each other. Hit that subscribe button because these are the stories that don't get told enough, and they need to be heard. 3 days passed. Diane worked her shifts, helped Marcus with his spelling homework, folded the never-ending mountain of laundry that accumulates when you're trying to keep one child looking presentable on a budget that barely covers existence. It was Saturday morning. Cartoons played on the television, the free channels that came with the building's basic cable. Marcus was sprawled on the floor, laughing at something animated and colorful and far removed from the weight adults carry. Then came the knock. Diane assumed it was Mrs. Patterson from 3B, who sometimes borrowed sugar and always returned it with interest, a woman who understood the economics of poverty and practiced the quiet solidarity that keeps people afloat. She opened the door, and everything stopped. Collins stood there, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was an older man, late 50s, the same strong jaw, the same deep-set eyes. He wore his uniform with the kind of bearing that comes from decades, not years. His posture was military straight, his presence commanding, and on his chest, where Collins wore the simple insignia of a private, this man wore stars. A general. Diane's heart began pounding, not from fear, from confusion, from the sudden sense that whatever was happening, it was bigger than she understood. Collins spoke first, nervous energy in his voice, gratitude in his eyes. He introduced his father, General Marcus Collins. The general extended his hand. Diane shook it, still processing, still trying to understand why a general was standing in her doorway, why her act of basic human kindness had brought military brass to her door. What the general said next would reshape everything Diane thought she knew about that rainy night. His son, he explained, had been in a place darker than physical exhaustion. The training accident had been serious, the hospital discharge, premature. The missed bus, the dead phone, the long walk through the rain. These weren't just inconveniences. They were the final straws on a breaking point. Collins had called his father that night, but the general was overseas, in a different time zone, unreachable in the way that military deployments make people unreachable. His son had walked for hours, been turned away from places that should have offered sanctuary, sat in that rain, his back against cold brick, and thought thoughts that no young person should have to think, thoughts about whether any of it was worth continuing. The general's voice tightened as he spoke, not with anger, but with the raw emotion of a father who'd nearly lost his son, who'd been thousands of miles away, powerless, while his child sat in the rain contemplating an ending. And then Diane had stopped, a woman with every reason not to, a woman with her own burdens, her own struggles, her own reasons to keep her head down and her door locked. She'd stopped, she'd seen, she'd helped. Diane's breath caught. She hadn't known, hadn't understood how close to the edge he'd been. She'd just seen someone who needed help. The general looked at her with an intensity that comes from military training, but was softened by fatherhood, by gratitude, by something that looked like reverence. "You saved my son's life," he said. His voice broke just slightly on the word life. "And I came here to thank you and to ask what I can do for you." The question hung in the air. Marcus had wandered over, peeking around his mother's leg, eyes wide at the uniformed men, at the gravity of whatever adult thing was happening that he couldn't quite understand but could feel. Diane stammered that she didn't need anything, that she was just glad he was okay. Because to Diane, this was what you did. This was human. This was right. But the general had come prepared. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope, told her it wasn't charity, it was gratitude. Inside was documentation for a fully funded scholarship for Marcus, a grant to help with her housing, and news that he'd spoken to the owner of Riverside Nursing Home, where Diane had worked for 5 years without a single raise, and that was about to change. Diane's hands trembled as she held the envelope. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from the money, though that mattered, but from something deeper, from being seen, from having her struggle acknowledged, from discovering that her act of kindness had rippled into something she couldn't have imagined. Collins stepped forward, told her she hadn't asked him why he was out there that night, hadn't asked if he deserved help or scrutinized his story or demanded proof of his worthiness. She just helped. And in a world that so rarely offers help without conditions, that was everything. Diane wiped her eyes and said something her mother used to tell her, something passed down through generations of Black women who survived by keeping their humanity intact. You do good because it's right, not because someone's watching. The general nodded, looked at Marcus, told the boy he had a good mother and to never forget it. Before they left, Collins hugged Diane. Not a polite hug, not a formal embrace, but the kind of hug that comes from holding on to the kindness you thought the world had run out of, from being pulled back from an edge you were too close to seeing clearly. They thanked each other, both of them, because sometimes being saved and being the one who saves, they're the same thing. Take a moment and think about that. When's the last time you stopped for someone? When's the last time someone stopped for you? Leave a comment below. I read every single one, because your stories matter as much as Diane's. And if this story is speaking to you, share it, not for the algorithm, for the person who needs to hear it. That night, after Marcus went to bed, after the envelope had been placed on the table and the weight of what happened began to settle, Diane sat on her couch in the quiet. She thought about her mother, about lessons passed down through generations, about what it means to be Black in a world that doesn't always see your worth, doesn't always value your dignity, doesn't always recognize your humanity. She thought about the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering if she was doing enough for Marcus, if working 2 jobs and still coming up short made her a failure, if surviving was the same as succeeding. And she thought about Collins, a man she'd known for one night, who'd reminded her of something she'd almost forgotten in the grind of survival. That kindness isn't weakness, it's rebellion. In a world that tells you to harden your heart, to look out for yourself, to stay in your lane and mind your business, choosing to help someone is an act of resistance. Choosing to see someone when the world has made them invisible is an act of love. And sometimes the people you save are the ones who save you right back. Diane didn't know what her future held. The scholarship for Marcus would open doors she'd only dreamed about. The housing grant would mean she could breathe a little easier, worry a little less. The raise at work would mean dignity in her labor, recognition of her worth. But more than any of that, more than the material help, as life-changing as it was, what the General and Collins had given her was something she'd been missing. Hope. Not the naive kind. Not the kind that ignores reality or pretends struggle doesn't exist, but the kind that says, your kindness matters, your humanity matters, you matter, in a world that had spent years telling her she didn't. So here's what I want you to take from Diane's story. Here's what matters beyond the narrative, beyond the emotional beats, beyond even the happy resolution. Diane didn't have much. By most measures, she had almost nothing, but she gave what she had. And in doing so, she reminded us all of something we forget too easily, something we need to remember now more than ever. Humanity isn't about what you have, it's about what you do when no one's watching, when there's no reward, when the cameras are off and the recognition won't come, and the only witness is your own conscience. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, not as statistics or stereotypes or problems, but as human beings carrying their own weight, fighting their own battles, deserving of the same dignity and kindness you hope someone would offer you. Diane's story isn't unique because she helped someone. It's powerful because she helped someone when she had every reason not to, when her own survival was precarious, when the system had given her nothing and asked for everything, and she still chose kindness. That's not just a nice story. That's resistance. That's revolution in its quietest, most powerful form. If this story moved you, and I hope it did, I want to hear from you. Not just a like or a share, though those help us reach more people who need to hear stories like this. I want to know your story. When's the last time you stopped for someone? When's the last time someone stopped for you? What moment of unexpected kindness changed your perspective, changed your day, maybe even changed your life? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one, because these stories matter. Your story matters. You matter. And if you're here because you believe kindness still exists in this world, if you believe our stories deserve to be told, if you believe that resilience isn't just survival but grace, then welcome home. This is our Black Diary, where we honor the moments the world tries to forget, where we remember that our humanity is our greatest strength, where we tell stories that remind us who we are when everything else tries to tell us who we should be. Diane's story is one story, but it's also every story of every person who chose compassion over convenience, who chose to see instead of looking away, who chose to be human in a world that often rewards the opposite. These are the stories that matter. These are the stories that change things, not through grand gestures or viral moments, but through the quiet, persistent, revolutionary act of treating each other with dignity. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember what Diane taught us. Keep your heart soft, even when the world tells you not to, especially when the world tells you not to. Because that softness, that willingness to be vulnerable, to care, to help, that's not weakness, that's strength. And it might just save someone's life.